Hello, everyone. Tonight's story is a soft, slow journey through shadows and memories. A tale of a man who wandered without knowing he had already crossed into something beyond. This story is gentle, dreamlike, and filled with calm voices and forgotten thoughts. It's not scary, only curious. So close your eyes if you like. Get cozy under the blankets. Let this story wrap around you like a soft night breeze. And if you enjoy these quiet tales that help you drift off peacefully, please consider subscribing to the channel. Turn on the little bell so you'll know when the next bedtime adventure begins. It really helps us continue creating calm stories for calm nights. Now, let's begin. The clock in Thomas Marin's living room no longer ticked. The small brass hands were stuck at 3:11, as they had been for years. But Thomas didn't mind. He had stopped measuring time long ago. The light through the windows was always a soft gray, never bright, never dark. The house was always quiet, but never silent. Just enough noise to suggest someone had just stepped out of the room. Thomas wandered from room to room in his slippers. They made the softest shuffling sound, like a whisper against the wooden floors. He liked that sound. It reminded him of libraries and old paper and rainy afternoons. Each room of the house looked exactly as it always had. His armchair by the fireplace still had the slight dent where he used to sit. The teacup on the kitchen table was forever half full. The radio played an old song sometimes, faint and fuzzy, like it was trying to remember the lyrics. Thomas didn't question any of it. It all felt natural, like he had lived this way forever. Sometimes he opened the front door, but outside wasn't like it used to be. The street no longer had cars, no people walking dogs, no sound of children playing, just fog, thick and slow-moving. It curled around the porch and the steps like it was waiting for him to decide something. He would close the door quietly and go back to the hallway, as if he had forgotten why he opened the door in the first place. One day, if you could call it a day, Thomas noticed something new. A crack in the wallpaper in the hallway. It was faint, barely visible in the soft light, but he stood there staring at it for a long while, like it was whispering to him. Or maybe it was just his own breath bouncing softly off the quiet walls. The next time he passed the hallway, the crack was longer, and the wallpaper near it looked a little faded. He reached out to touch it. The paper felt like dried leaves, thin, crinkled. He didn't peel it back. Not yet. Instead, he turned and went to sit in his armchair. Though he didn't remember getting tired, he never slept. Not in the usual way. He would close his eyes sometimes. But his mind never fully drifted away. It wandered. Like a lazy cloud through familiar skies, he would recall voices, soft ones, calling his name, but always too far away to answer. The odd thing was, he never felt lonely. Not truly. Even though the house was empty, it didn't feel abandoned. It felt paused, like someone had stepped out for just a moment and would return soon. Even the dust didn't seem to settle fully, hovering in the air like it was waiting for permission to fall. Sometimes, Thomas would find things he didn't remember owning. A pair of boots by the door, not his size. A book on the end table with no title, its pages blank. Once he found a child's toy truck in the hallway, painted bright red, and it rang a little when he rolled it gently forward with his foot. He smiled at it, but it made his heart feel oddly heavy. So he set it on the shelf beside the radio and didn't touch it again. The neighbors never visited. He sometimes thought about them. The woman next door with the little dog that barked too much. The man across the street who played violin on Sundays. But he hadn't seen them in, well, he couldn't recall. The mail never came. The phone never rang. But somehow, it never felt wrong. It just felt still. One evening, or perhaps morning, he opened the linen closet and saw something strange. A staircase. It hadn't been there before. It was narrow, descending into the dark. No light, no rail, just steps, each one just slightly thinner than the last. He stared down it, but didn't go. Not yet. Instead, he closed the closet door and walked to the window. The fog was still there, but now he could see something else in it. Faint lights, softly blinking, like tiny lanterns far away. He blinked, and they were gone. He spent the next few cycles of time, he didn't call them days, wandering the house, finding new things, hearing soft knocks on the walls, sometimes in threes, sometimes just once, always soft, like someone didn't want to wake him up. Then one day, he found a note on the kitchen table, written in his own handwriting. But he hadn't written it. He was sure of that. It simply said, "It's time to go downstairs." He sat for a long while, reading the words over and over. The tea in the cup beside him had grown cold, though it had never really been warm. Finally, he stood, walked to the linen closet, opened the door again. The staircase was still there, exactly the same. He placed one slippered foot on the first step, then the next. The third creaked, the fourth was silent, and down he went. Not hurried, not frightened, just curious. The stairs led not into darkness, but into soft light, the kind that glows like candlelight and feels like memories. He stepped into a space that looked like no place he remembered, and yet he felt he had been there before. A field stretched out before him, covered in silver grass, that swayed even though there was no wind. And in the distance, he saw a figure waving. No face, just light. He waved back and walked forward, slowly, smiling, in the world behind him. The house, the hallways, the stillness began to fade, like an old photograph left in the sun. But it didn't make him sad. It felt like putting down a heavy book and stretching his legs after a long rest. And the story continued, but not in the house. Not anymore. Thomas walked slowly through the silver field. The grass whispered against his legs like old friends murmuring secrets. There was no wind, yet the blades moved. Not like they were swaying, but like they were listening, following him. The sky above wasn't blue or gray or black. It was more like the inside of a shell, soft and shimmering. There were no clouds, no stars, just a glow. A constant, gentle shimmer that never flickered and never faded. He didn't feel cold. He didn't feel warm either. He felt the way you feel in a dream, like the world fits around you perfectly, even when it doesn't make sense. The figure ahead remained distant, still waving, still glowing, not rushing him, just being there, patient. Thomas kept walking, each step light and soundless. His slippers left no marks behind. He looked back once. The staircase was gone. So was the house. So was everything he remembered. And yet, he didn't feel lost. He felt gently carried by the moment, as though something was guiding him with invisible hands. After what might have been a mile or a moment, he reached a small hill. At the top, a gate stood by itself. No fence. Just a gate. It was wooden, painted white, with peeling edges and a small bronze handle. Behind it, the land changed. Beyond the gate, the silver field ended, and a different kind of place began. A narrow path lined with tall reeds and glassy stones. The light there looked a little deeper. Not darker, just deeper. Like stepping into a memory. Thomas stopped in front of the gate. The figure was still there, just beyond it. Now closer. Still faceless, still gentle. The figure nodded once. Thomas reached for the handle and paused. His heart gave one slow, steady beat. Not out of fear, more like respect. He opened the gate. It didn't creak. It didn't resist. It opened like it had been waiting. He stepped through, and the air shifted. It smelled faintly of lavender and something he couldn't name. A scent he remembered but couldn't place. Like the air in a room where someone you loved once waited. The path beneath his feet felt smooth, like river stones worn by time. Each step echoed slightly, not loud, just thoughtful, as if the ground was remembering every step. The tall reeds whispered as he passed, not in words, more in rhythm, like a song hummed without a tune. As he walked, he noticed things, shapes hidden between the reeds, benches, stone wells, flickering lanterns that floated above the ground, soft glows of memory and warmth. On one bench sat an old man. He wore a suit and polished shoes. He was reading a newspaper that never turned a page. He looked up and nodded at Thomas. Not startled, not curious, just polite. Like someone seeing an old neighbor walk by. "Nice day," the man said, folding the paper without ever touching it. Thomas nodded. "Yes, I think it is." The man smiled, then faded, not suddenly, like mist drying in the sun. Thomas kept walking. The reeds opened up to a wide clearing with a table in the center. An ordinary table, wooden, a bit scratched. There were 2 chairs. On the table sat a teapot and 2 cups. One was full, one was empty. He sat in the empty chair. The cup warmed in his hand. No steam got, but he could feel the warmth. He didn't drink, just held it. He looked across the table, and someone was sitting there now. A woman, dressed in soft colors, her hair tied back loosely. No face, just the sense of presence, like the memory of someone you loved very much. She reached across the table and touched his hand. He didn't flinch. It didn't surprise him. Her touch felt like a lullaby. "Do you remember now?" she asked. Thomas tilted his head slightly. "I think I'm starting to." She nodded. "This is the place between places," she said. "Most people don't walk this far in their sleep. But you always had a curious heart." He smiled. "I suppose I did." "You stayed in the house longer than most," she said. "There was something you needed to feel, to finish." He looked down at the teacup. "I don't think I was ready." "No one ever is," she said gently. "That's why this place exists, to help you cross softly. Not all at once." He looked up again. "Have I crossed?" She didn't answer. She just smiled. The kind of smile that feels like forgiveness. The field began to shimmer again. But this time, instead of silver, it turned soft gold. The reeds swayed lower, and the path ahead began to open. Thomas looked toward it, and then back at the woman. But she was gone. The teacup in his hand was now full. Warm. He took a sip. It tasted like the way autumn feels. Familiar. Sweet, a little sad, but also full. He stood up and walked toward the golden light. Not rushing, not resisting, just being carried. The path wound through an orchard next. Trees full of leaves, though no fruit. Their branches arched above him like shelter. He ran his fingers along the bark. It felt alive. Somewhere between 2 trees, he saw a mirror, standing upright on its own. Its frame was smooth, silvered with ivy. The glass shimmered but didn't reflect. He stepped closer, and the surface began to ripple, not like water, not like memory. He saw flashes, himself as a boy, running down a hill with a paper kite. His mother standing at the bottom, arms open, laughter echoing. Then it changed. His first apartment, his favorite chair. A dog he had loved for 12 short years. A girl he never married, but always remembered. A snowfall. A birthday cake with too many candles. A hospital bed. A window that never opened. A final breath. He stepped back. The mirror quieted, but it didn't disappear. He touched his chest. He felt something. Not a heartbeat, not quite, but something warm. Settled, he walked past the mirror, and the orchard slowly opened into a meadow. Here, there were voices distant, calling, laughing, singing. Not haunting, welcoming. The light grew stronger, but still gentle, it didn't blind, it invited. In the center of the meadow stood a tall tree. Its branches spread out like open arms. Its leaves shimmered with every color memory could hold. And beneath it was a bench. Thomas walked toward it, sat down, and breathed. Not the breath of lungs, but the breath of presence, of understanding. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't confused. He was finally still. He looked up at the leaves above. One fell gently, landing on his knee. He picked it up. It turned into a photograph. A picture of him and someone he'd forgotten. Both smiling, young, bright. He closed his eyes. The bench beneath him didn't feel like wood anymore. It felt like air, not like clouds, not like sleep. And for the first time since he could remember, he felt himself let go. Thomas did not open his eyes. Not right away, because where he was now opening, eyes didn't feel necessary. He could feel everything without needing to look. There was a softness under him, like clouds soaked in warmth. He couldn't tell if he was sitting, floating, or simply resting on something that had no name. The silence around him wasn't empty. It was full. It was the kind of quiet that listened back. He finally opened his eyes, not because he needed to, but because it felt like the next thing to do, and he found himself in a room, unlike any room he had ever known. The walls were tall, but they curved gently overhead, like the inside of a shell. They shimmered softly, as if woven from light and memory. The air smelled like lilac and warm pages. A gentle hum filled the space, like a song without words. Thomas stood. The floor beneath him was cool, but comforting. Not stone, not wood. Just calm. The way a lullaby might feel if you could walk across it. In the center of the room, there stood a small table upon it. A single candle burned, though there was no flame, only glow. Its light didn't flicker. It pulsed. Like a slow heartbeat. Steady. Reassuring. On the far wall, there were doors, each a different shape and height. Some tall and narrow, some round and short, some colorful, others simple. They had no knobs, no labels. But somehow he knew. Each one led to something that belonged to him. He approached the nearest door. It was shaped like a keyhole. He raised his hand, and without touching it, the door opened. Slowly. Like a sigh. Inside was a bedroom, not his own, but familiar. Sunlight filtered through sheer curtains, dancing across the floorboards. There were toys on the ground, a wooden train, a teddy bear with a missing eye, a picture book with a curled corner, and on the bed, child lay sleeping. Small. Still. Peaceful. Thomas watched for a long while, until he remembered. It was him. That was his room. His bear, his favorite book. That was a moment in time, when everything was quiet and safe. And simple. The door began to close. Gently. Without rush. As if that memory had finished breathing. He turned to the next door. This one round. Painted green. It opened with a whisper. It led to a garden. Evening sunlight stretched across rows of vegetables. A woman hummed softly, hands in the dirt. She wore a scarf around her hair. Her back was turned, but Thomas didn't need to see her face. It was his grandmother, the one who made honey tea and sang lullabies in another language. The scent of tomatoes and wet earth and soap drifted into his heart like a song he'd forgotten. He loved. She turned slightly, not quite looking at him, but smiling. He wanted to speak, but his throat stayed still. Then the wind blew through the garden, and with it, she faded. The garden shimmered and dissolved gently into air. He stepped back. The door closed at you. Feeling like gratitude filled his chest. He walked on, opening more doors, a classroom with chalk dust in the air, and the sound of laughter. A field at dusk, with fireflies dancing like tiny lanterns. a rainy bus stop, where he shared an umbrella with a stranger, a hospital hallway, where he sat for hours, watching the floor tiles instead of the clock. Each door opened revealed, then closed, never locking, just resting. He came to one door, slightly cracked. It pulsed with a soft blue glow. He stepped in. It was a living room, quiet, modern, tidy. And there, in the armchair, sat his father. Older than Thomas remembered, but calm, peaceful, reading a book without pages. The man looked up and smiled. "Hello, son," he said. His voice was warm. Like it had never left, Thomas felt something move through him. Not pain, not joy, just a soft release, like something that had waited too long to be said. "I didn't get to say goodbye," Thomas whispered. The man closed the book and stood. He walked over and placed his hand gently on Thomas's shoulder. "You never had to," he said. "I've always been here, even when you forgot, even when I forgot." Thomas nodded. His eyes stung, but no tears fell. Instead, the whole room seemed to breathe around them. They stood there for a moment, not holding on, just understanding. Then the man returned to the chair and slowly faded, as if turning into air. Thomas stepped out. The door closed softly behind him. The candle on the table still glowed, now a little brighter. He realized something then. This wasn't a place of judgment or punishment. It wasn't about where he had been or what he had done. It was a place that simply remembered. It held every quiet moment, every unfinished sentence, every small kindness, every missed goodbye, and let them unfold like pages in a book, one by one, until nothing remained heavy. He sat down beside the candle and watched it pulse. Its rhythm now matched his own. He closed his eyes not to sleep, but to listen, and in the quiet he heard something beautiful. Not music, not words, just the sound of everything coming home. The soft hum returned low and patient. It moved through the air like mist on a quiet morning. Thomas opened his eyes, but found no room, no floor, no candle, no table. He was standing now, but not on anything, and yet he did not fall. Beneath him stretched a sky without clouds. Above him, the same, only light, cool, soft, without direction. It didn't feel empty. It felt prepared, as though it had made space just for him. And then in the distance, something shimmered. It moved toward him slowly, a shape, not walking, just. Approaching it looked like a figure, though not solid, a silhouette woven from memory, flickering gently like candlelight in water. When the figure arrived, it didn't speak, at least not aloud, but Thomas heard it, in his thoughts, not in words, in feeling. "Welcome," the voice seemed to say. "You've come far, and now you may visit the archive." Thomas didn't question. He simply nodded, and the world around him shifted as though someone had turned the page of reality. He was now standing in a vast circular room, so wide he couldn't see the walls. The ceiling reached higher than mountains, and all around him there were shelves. They were not ordinary shelves. They were alive, gently shifting, filled not with books or boxes, but with light, tiny globes of soft color, each glowing differently. Some pulsed like heartbeats. Others flickered like memories about to fade. Some were steady, silent still. The archivist hovered beside him, its body neither male nor female, neither old nor young, just presence. You may touch them if you wish. Each is a moment from your life, or someone else's. Thomas reached out toward a soft blue orb. It hovered closer, warm to the touch. He closed his fingers around it, and everything changed. He was back in a hallway. He was 5, holding a drawing, running to show his mother. She laughed, held him up, spun him in the air. There was music playing, a record, and the smell of pancakes. He released the orb, and the hallway vanished. The archivist waited. No judgment, no instruction, only patience. Thomas touched another orb, a deep amber one, and found himself older at a lake, sitting on a dock next to someone, a friend, a love. They were skipping stones, saying nothing, but the silence was full. When he let go, he was back in the archive. He wandered, touched others. A rainy window, a broken plate, a moment of laughter in a stairwell, a deep breath before speaking truth, a final hug, a first step, a lost photograph, the sound of his name whispered in love, the way a dog looked at him the day it passed. He moved slowly, not rushing, not choosing, letting the moments come to him, and then he touched one that felt different. It was darker, heavy, but still warm. He was in a hospital room. Machines blinked softly. He was lying in bed, weak, still breathing through effort. Beside him, a woman sat, older, tired, but beautiful. She held his hand, spoke softly. "I'll be okay," she whispered. "You can go if you're ready." He watched himself lying there, watched the lines on the monitor, and he understood. This had been the moment, the crossing, not a sudden step, but a soft exhale, an invitation. He let the orb go and returned to the archive. The archivist turned toward him, its voice inside him again. "You remember now, and that is enough." Thomas looked around the archive, pulsed moments, breathing, living. What happens now? He thought. The archivist moved gently away. The shelves parted like curtains, revealing a doorway. No wall, just a threshold made of light and stillness. "Where does it lead?" Thomas asked. "Forward." The archivist replied, "Only forward. There is no backward here. Only what has been accepted and what waits to be seen." Thomas stepped forward, not afraid, not eager, simply ready. He paused, turned back for a moment. "Will I forget?" he asked. The archivist gave no answer. "Only this: some things you will, some things you won't. But what matters most will become a part of your being, even if you never speak it again." Thomas nodded, took a breath, and stepped through the doorway. The archive faded, not gone, just further away. And ahead of him, a new space opened. It looked like a night sky, but he wasn't sure if he was beneath it or part of it. The stars pulsed gently, and in each one he felt a life, not just his own, but others. People he had passed on sidewalks, spoken to once, loved deeply, or only glanced at, and every star was a doorway, not for now, but for later. He floated forward at peace, no thoughts, just the soft feeling of belonging, of being held by something vast and kind and far below, or maybe above. The archive stood glowing in silence, waiting, always waiting for the next dreamer to arrive. Thomas drifted gently. Now there was no ground beneath his feet, no ceiling above, only the slow, quiet movement of himself through space or time, or something softer than both. The sky around him was neither day nor night. It shifted not in color, but in feeling. One moment it felt like early morning in spring, the next like the hush just before snowfall. Then the warm stillness of an afternoon in a childhood summer. None of it visible, all of it familiar. Eventually he began to hear something, a sound, rhythmic, soft, like waves lapping against shore, but slower, deeper, almost like breathing. The stars above him began to fade, and the shimmer of light below grew brighter. Soon the ground returned. He found himself standing on a stretch of sand, silver and smooth, with a shoreline that curved out of sight in both directions. The sea before him was not blue, not green, but translucent, like liquid glass. It moved in long, slow waves, each one rising, curling and falling without ever breaking. It made no crash, no splash, only a deep sigh, like the sea itself was remembering something. Thomas looked down. His reflection shimmered, not quite as he remembered, a little younger, a little older, a little more. Whole to his left, a stone path led away from the beach, winding between glowing reeds and gentle dunes. To his right, a small wooden boat rested at the edge of the tide, rocking slowly, as if waiting. He sat at the edge of the water, letting it wash over his feet. It wasn't cold, it wasn't warm, it was. Understanding it wrapped around his ankles, like a welcome back, like forgiveness. Behind him, a soft rustle. He turned, and there stood a child, barefoot, hair full of sea salt and wind. The child didn't speak, but smiled. Thomas smiled back. There was something in the boy's eyes, familiar. He didn't need to ask who he was. He already knew. The child sat beside him. They watched the sea together. The boat rocked quietly. The waves breathed their soft song. This is where the deep memories come, the boy finally said. His voice was clear, but not loud. God, it felt like something remembered from a dream. What kind of memories? Thomas asked. The ones you forgot you were carrying, said the boy. The ones buried under the ones you thought mattered more. They sat quietly, and then from the sea came Echo's soft laughter, the creak of a bicycle, the crackle of a fire, the sound of wind through trees, the clink of a spoon in a mug, the voice of someone saying his name, not loudly, not urgently, just kindly, the way someone calls you when it's time to come home. The child stood. You don't have to remember them all, he said, but if you let them wash over you, they'll lighten the load. Thomas nodded. The boy walked to the boat, placed a hand on the edge, then looked back. This part is gentle, he said, but important. Thomas stood, walked slowly toward the boat, and climbed in. The child did not follow. He only watched, smiled again, then faded, not gone, just resting. The boat drifted from shore. The waves carried it. No sails, no oars, just the quiet pull of something beyond the sea, deepened beneath him, glowed with color and light. Beneath the surface, he saw shapes, memories, not as images, but as emotions, the feeling of helping someone and never knowing it mattered, the ache of parting, the joy of being noticed, the stillness of waiting for someone who never came, the courage it took to forgive, the softness of falling asleep beside someone you trust. All of it moved beneath the boat, not demanding attention, just offering, inviting him to remember. Or not ahead. The sky shimmered as shoreline appeared, different from the one he left. This one rose slowly into soft cliffs atop them. Lights glowed like lanterns, each one a warm pulse welcoming alive. As the boat neared, the tide gently pushed it ashore. Thomas stepped out. His feet touched stone. It hummed beneath him, like the steps of a temple built from silence. The cliff path led upward, each step gentle. The wind here carried voices, not speaking, just existing, the kind of voices you feel, not hear. As he reached the top, he found a garden, not wild, not manicured, but balanced, alive. There were plants he didn't recognize, flowers that glowed without burning, trees whose leaves moved even when the air was still. And in the center, a bench he sat, not because he was tired, but because it felt right. Across from him, another figure approached, this one cloaked in white face, hidden beneath a hood of woven light. You've walked far, the figure said. Their voice was neither young nor old, neither male nor female. It simply was. I've walked without knowing. Thomas replied. That is the truest kind of journey, the figure said, to arrive without needing to ask why. They sat in silence, the garden blooming around them. Is this the end? Thomas asked. The figure shook their head. There are no ends here, only returns and recognitions. Thomas looked up at the sky. It pulsed like a heartbeat, a slow rhythm, patient kind. You may rest here, said the figure. Or you may continue. What lies ahead? He asked. A place where you are no longer remembering, but being remembered, where you are not the one recalling, but the one being carried by those who loved you, who will love you, who never stopped. Thomas stood. The figure did not move, but the garden opened slightly, revealing a new path, winding through light, toward something he could not name, but already trusted. He looked back once more, the sea below, the boy on the shore, the boat gently rocking. Then he turned and walked forward, and the garden slowly closed behind him, not with finality, but with peace. Like the last page of a book that knows it will be read again and again, whenever the dreamer is ready. The path ahead was not made of stone, not of earth. It was light, braided and woven like a ribbon of moonlight, suspended across a vast silence. Thomas stepped onto it. The bridge didn't sway, didn't creak. It simply accepted him like a memory welcoming its maker. Beneath the bridge was nothing, not darkness, not water, Not stars, just stillness. As if this part of the world had been set aside, for only this crossing the air was softer now. So soft, it didn't feel like air at all, more like a feeling, a knowing, a kind of peace that lived beneath words. Each step he took was effortless, yet full. He felt lighter, as though every footprint carried away a little weight. He hadn't realized how much he'd been carrying until he felt it leave him. About halfway across the bridge, he noticed small lights drifting beside him. They weren't lamps, they weren't stars, they were moments, soft orbs of memory, hovering in the air, following him gently. Each one flickered with warmth, and with each flicker, he saw pieces of life. A woman's laughter, the feel of grass under bare feet, the scent of his childhood blanket. The first time he said, "I'm sorry," and meant it. The moment he watched snow fall, without thinking of anything at all. These lights didn't distract him. They comforted like old friends who didn't need conversation, just presence. At the far end of the bridge, a figure waited. Not like the others. This one wore no shape. It shimmered like starlight wrapped in wind. As Thomas drew closer, he felt not fear, but reverence, as though meeting something not above him, but within him, a part that had always been waiting. "You've come far," the voice said. It wasn't spoken aloud, but heard deeply within every quiet corner of him. "I didn't know I was on a journey," Thomas replied. "No one ever does, not at first," the voice said. They stood together at the edge of the bridge ahead. The path vanished into a wide open sky, like the space between music notes or the pause before a final word. "Is this the end?" Thomas asked again. The voice answered gently. "This is the beginning of what does not need to be understood. Only felt you have remembered enough. Now it is time to be remembered." Thomas nodded, but didn't step forward yet. "I still feel things," he said. "Still see people, still remember their names? Is that supposed to fade?" "No," the voice said. "That is what you are now. You are their memory of you, their love for you, their stories. You are becoming part of their dreams, and their quiet moments. You are not fading, you are spreading." Thomas let that settle. It felt true and strange and beautiful. The figure moved beside him, and together they looked out into the sky. From the distance, he began to hear soft voices, familiar, the way a melody is familiar. Even when you don't know the tune, they were calling, but not urgently. Calling like someone calls you in a dream, when it's time to go, not away, but home. He closed his eyes and opened them again. He was no longer standing on a bridge, but floating gently, slowly, through places he recognized, but not from one life. He saw halls lined with paintings, but each painting moved. Each one showed a moment. Sometimes his, sometimes others. He drifted past a painting of a hand, reaching for another in forgiveness. Another of a child sleeping in someone's arms. One of an old man giving his coat to a stranger in winter. One of a woman planting flowers at dusk, even though no one would see them bloom. Each image glowed. Each one pulsed, as if breathing. He realized that these were not memories. Not in the usual sense. They were echoes, imprints of kindness, of choices made with care, no matter how small. They lived here in this in-between, woven into the walls, the air, the light. Thomas continued on. He passed through a doorway made of mist, and entered a space he could only describe as a library. But there were no books, just shelves of sound. Each shelf whispered. Each whisper told a life. He stopped by one, and heard himself telling someone, "I believe in you." Another whisper followed. Someone laughing, someone crying, someone whispering, "Thank you." He wasn't just remembering anymore. He was listening to how others had remembered him. Not always perfectly, but with warmth. He sat in the center of that place, let the sounds move through him. Then he felt something shift. A gentle nudge, like the world saying, "It's time." He stood again. A soft hallway had appeared, lined with glowing moss. The floor beneath him hummed. At the end of the hallway, a door waited, made not of wood or light, but of breath, soft, warm, alive. He approached, placed his hand against it, and it opened inward slowly. Inside was a room filled with stars. They floated, hovered, whirled softly, not in chaos, but in joy. Each star seemed to recognize him, and he them. Some were people, some were places, some were moments. He stepped into the room, and the stars began to move not around him, but with him, as if he was now one of them. Light among light, he looked down. There was no body, no feet, no hands, only presence, only a pulse. He was not lost. He was not gone. He had become a whisper in the breath of the living. A light in someone's quiet night, a warmth beside a grieving heart, a nudge toward kindness in a moment of choice. And somewhere, on a shore, a boat rocked gently empty, but still waiting, because journeys never really end. They only ripple. Thomas drifted, not as wind drifts, not as clouds do, but the way a thought drifts. When it has finished being thought and is ready to become silence, there was no more walking, no more rising or falling. He simply moved or was moved by something gentle, something knowing. He passed through a corridor made of light, but it wasn't harsh. It glowed softly like the last rays of dusk, touching the floor of a quiet home. The walls weren't solid. They shimmered like memories. He reached out to one, and instead of feeling it, he was inside it. He stood now in a kitchen. It smelled like soup and bread. There was steam curling from a pot, and someone hummed a quiet tune with no real melody, just comfort. He turned and saw her, his mother, younger than she was when she passed, but older than he remembered her as a child. She was somewhere in between, somewhere safe, somewhere whole. She didn't turn, didn't speak, but Thomas knew she felt him. She always had. He didn't need to say anything. The moment said it for him. It folded gently into his chest, and he stepped away. The kitchen faded, and the corridor returned. He passed another shimmer and entered a park. Autumn leaves tumbled around him. Children laughed. A man sat on a bench, feeding birds from his open home. Thomas recognized the man, though it took a moment. A teacher, not one he had ever thanked, not one he'd even thought about in years, but someone who had once, with quiet kindness, made a lonely boy feel seen. The man looked up, smiled, then returned to feeding the birds. That was enough. Thomas stepped back into the corridor. More rooms waited, more small goodbyes, not heavy, not sorrowful, just soft releases, like exhaling after holding your breath too long. He entered a quiet hallway. At the far end, a door stood open, inside a hospital room. He knew this one before his foot touched the threshold. The woman in the bed was very still. Beside her sat a young man, eyes, tired voice, low, reading from a book. Thomas sat silently in the corner, watching, remembering the boy was him. Years ago, the woman was his aunt, the one who raised him when no one else did, the one who never complained, even when the world had given her very little. She had smiled, even through pain. She had listened, even when no one else did. He watched himself read, watched her listening, and then watched as she gently closed her eyes. One last time. There was no rush, no flash, just stillness. He stepped back. The door closed, but it did not lock. Nothing here ever did. Now the corridor began to dissolve, slowly, not ending, just melting into something else. He stood in a wide, open space, a kind of circular hall, quiet, bright. Around the edges stood chairs, and in each chair someone sat. Some faces he knew, others were strangers, and yet he felt them all, not as names, but as feelings. They were people he had touched in ways large and small. The woman he helped pick up spilled groceries in the rain. The boy he had once told, "You'll be okay," without even knowing his name. The friend he had hurt, but later forgiven. The one who forgave him, and those he had only passed for moments, but left something behind with. They sat in silence, but their silence was full, and together they turned toward him, not in judgment, but in offering. Thomas felt himself swell, not with pride, but with peace. A voice whispered, not from any one person, but from all of them. "You mattered." The words echoed not through the room, but through his being. Not, "You were perfect," not, "You are always kind," Just you mattered. It was enough. More than enough. A door opened behind them. Just slightly, Thomas turned. No one urged him. No one rushed him. But something called the sound of wind through tall grass, the rustle of leaves in late summer, the hum of a song with no words. He stepped through, and now he stood in a field, wide, quiet, endless. The stars above were fading. A soft golden glow rose at the horizon. Not the light of morning, but the light of remembrance. He heard footsteps behind him, turned, and saw a man. He was familiar. His face had his eyes. His walk had his weight. But younger, not just in years, in soul. It was Thomas, as he had been and still was, and would be. The two stood, one looking at the other. Then the younger version smiled, nodded, and faded, not away, but into him like returning a coat that had been on loan. Warm, worn, loved now, there was only one of him. But he felt doubled whole full. And as he turned toward the horizon, the sun did not rise. Instead, the light grew from within him, soft, brilliant, kind. And somewhere in the distance, a door opened again. But this time, it wasn't for him. It was for someone else. Someone beginning their own sleepwalk into the afterlife. The path beyond the tree was not straighted, curved gently like the edge of a dream you don't want to wake from it, was lined with soft grasses. It glowed not with light, but with welcome. Thomas walked slowly, not because he was weary, but because this moment felt sacred. Each step felt like part of a song, a rhythm older than words and deeper than memory. Air had changed again. It felt thinner, but not less. It was clearer, like something that had been blurros, now coming into focus. He could hear everything, and yet it was all quiet in the distance. A structure began to take shape, not tall, not grand, but comforting. A small house, simple, familiar. Its roof slanted gently. Windows open to the breeze. He had never seen it before, but somehow he had always known it would be there waiting. As he neared, eyes could see movement inside, soft shadows, not hurried, not still, just there. He stepped onto the porch, creaked not with age, but with memory. He reached for the door. It opened before he touched it. Inside, the light was golden, not from lamps, but from the walls, from the air itself, and from the souls within it. They stood quietly waiting for him to enter, not with smiles, not with tears, just with knowing. Woman who taught him how to cook when he was 10. The man who let him cry in the hardware store parking lot when he was 30. The friend who left too early. Neighbor whose garden he once accidentally watered for a whole summer, all there. Without time, without age, whole, no. One said a word, but they didn't need to. Each of them was a chapter, a paragraph, a sentence in his story. And now he was returning to the page where they had paused, stepped aside, and he walked through the house. Every object hummed gently. A teacup, a rocking chair, a scarf folded on the back of a chair, a newspaper turned to a crossword never finished. These weren't his things, not all of them, but each one had known him, had touched his life in ways he hadn't noticed. Then now they whispered softly to him. Far wall of the house was glass beyond. Ida garden bloomed, a vast quiet alive. Just outside table was set, one cup, one chair. The seat was waiting. He stepped through the open doorway and sat. The cup was warm steam, curled in a spiral like memory, rising slowly toward the stars. Didn't drink yet. He just sat, hands wrapped around the cup, breathing. Then a breeze lifted the edge of the tablecloth, and someone sat across from him. It was not a face he remembered, but a presence he knew, soft. Eyes, gentle, hands, a voice he hadn't heard before, but somehow had always missed. I'm here to sit with you. The figure said, not to guide, not to explain, just to be. And that was enough. They sat together in silence, but the silence was full. The figure reached across the table, placed something in Thomas's hand. It was a key, small, silver, warm. He didn't ask what it opened. He knew the house, the path, the light. They had always been his. He just hadn't arrived. Yet he stood. The figure did. To the garden shimmered the stars in the sky, blinked once, then softened. He walked to the back of the house, where another door stood this one smaller, less grand, more quiet. He placed the key into the lock, and the door vanished, not open, vanished behind either. Room empty, but not lowly waiting. This was not a room from his life, a room for what came next. He stepped in, and the air closed around him gently, lovingly, as if the universe had been holding its breath just for this moment. And now it exhaled. Thomas closed his eyes, not to sleep, to begin, and the room began to fill with light, not from lamps, not from stars, but from him, and far in the distance, in a world not yet waking, a child stirred in bed, smiled, dreamed a name they didn't know, but somehow had always carried. The room was quiet, but not still. It pulsed gently, as if the walls breathed with him, not as boundaries, but as companions. There was no ceiling, only sky, a sky that flickered like the inside of a memory, soft pinks, faded gold, the color of warmth just before sleep. Thomas stood in the center, not as a man, not as a shadow, but as something lighter, something truer. He had no reflection, but he had presence. He didn't feel like a person anymore, but he felt more whole than he ever had. The room had no windows, because it didn't need them. The light came from everywhere and nowhere, and it felt familiar. There was no rush now, no voice calling him forward, no questions left to answer, only peace, as if everything that had waited had finally arrived. He turned slowly, taking in the space, and where his gaze fell things appeared. A rocking chair, rocking gently, with no one in it, feather drifting downward, even without wind. A music box playing a melody he knew but couldn't name. He sat not because he was tired, but because it felt like the right way to end. The rocking chair accepted him, moved with his rhythm, as if it had always known him. Air shifted, and around him dreams began to gather, not his, not only his, but the dreams of others, of a woman missing her father and not knowing why. She always cries in autumn, of a boy who once looked up at the stars and whispered thank you to no one, of a man who regretted a word never said, but kept moving anyway, of someone placing flowers on a stranger's grave, feeling something they couldn't explain. These dreams moved like threads, weaving slowly, gently around Thomas, and he realized he was no longer dreaming. He was the dream, remembered, carried, loved, passed on in quiet moments, in laughter and silence, in the way someone might tilt their head when thinking deeply, or pause before speaking, as if listening to something long ago. Said the room began to dissolve. Chair beneath him became part of the light. The floor lifted him without lifting. Air sang without sound. He drifted upward, not into a sky, but into the hush before sunrise, the breath before a baby's laugh, quiet held between old friends who say nothing because nothing needs to be said. Below him the world turned gently, as it always had. He saw a house, not the one he had left, one like it somewhere else, someone else's. Since a day, child stirred, frowned slightly in sleep, then smiled, because they had felt something, someone somewhere who had loved deeply and had been loved in return. That was all. Thomas became that smile. He became a breeze through a cracked window, a feeling of comfort that had no name, the warmth behind a song a mother hums without knowing why. He had crossed not into something else, but into everything. A star blinked above one he had never noticed before, or maybe had always seen in far away, or perhaps nearby. The house with the tree with his name etched into its roots glowed softly, lanterns swaying gently, as if to say he is here, he is part of us now forever. And so the dream that had walked, that had remembered, that had opened doors and sipped tea in the afterlife, became the dreamer, became the breath, became the light that tucks us in when we don't know we need it. And in the softest corner of sleep, you might find him still walking, still gentle, still listening, waiting quietly for you to arrive.